he could really make a name for himself if Manchester United do have the rebuild. I think he'll be one that will stay.
My experience working inside a football club is that it really annoys players when the manager takes the spotlight.
All these goals are works of art, aren't they?
Yeah, and he's a modern player. He's not he's a forward. He's a wide forward, really, who can play inside.
An incredible number of matches that never happened before.
Yes, but
right.
not
okay,
if it's
no,
on.
that's all you had to say.
Not if it's on a load of
no,
different.
all you had to say is it a good
streams
thing?
that we have to pay for.
Is it a good thing? Yes. That's the most right-wing statement I've ever heard from you.
Hi gang, we've recorded 2 podcasts today, but this is the first one that you'll see.
And we start with a wide-ranging 3 of the best.
And then we go on to Martin's letter from the Gantry, in which he talks about set pieces.
We've got comparisons, but not players this time, clubs.
Voice of Passion, in which we just have a mighty row.
And it's live. Actually, that's part of the podcast, not me just being nostalgic.
And we finish up with Stoppage Time and our favourite Christmas songs. Oh, and the other podcast, which will be coming up probably next week, is with a footballer who's got a really good take on things that are different. Don't forget substack.com to read us, Patreon to get nearer to us, and stay to the end to find out who that footballer is.
He's the first one ever to come into the Kingston kitchen here. So for that effort alone, you must watch him.
Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, has gone check. Somehow we've both got on check shirts, goodness knows how.
Yeah, and we're both feeling the winter chill of the kitchen, I think, as well.
Right, loads to talk about. Let's not waste any time. We're going to start with 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
Martin, young player, old player, young player.
Yeah, I think Curtis Jones should get a mention because of his continuing excellent form for Liverpool. He was very much to the fore in that recent classic game at Newcastle. Getting more opportunity, fulfilling his potential. Even your argument about age, coming to the age where you either do or you don't, he is doing, which I think is great, particularly for a local lad. I also want to mention Amad Diallo of Manchester United, having obviously a rough time on and off the pitch at the moment, but he seems to bring some joy to the difficulties that they're having. He plays with a smile on his face. He's an eye-catching player, a crowd pleaser. He's got almost a tragic backstory, really, with his being trafficked as a child into Italy. It looks like this football outlet has given him a happy ending for that. I can't imagine what he's been through. He does talk about it, and I think that's great credit to him that he's able to talk about it. And of course, not everybody in football's born with a silver spoon in their mouth. So, but I just think having overcome those adversities must give him some real steel of spirit as well. And with Amorim wanting to play wing-backs, he seems to be tailor-made for that right wing-back role. In the certain games where the attacking side of the wing-back role is the most important. But he does do his tracking back as well. And I think he's one to keep an eye on because he could really make a name for himself if Manchester United do have the rebuild. I think he'll be one that will stay if there are a lot of players going, which ex-Manchester United players seem to be suggesting is the case. I don't think they're talking about Amad Diallo, so good luck to him.
Football's changed massively in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I'm not sure. I'm not going to blame Brighton and Hove Albion for this, but basically the big clubs, the successful clubs, not so much the big ones, the successful ones, used to buy players between the ages of 23, 24, 25. Because that's when you really got into the best teams, when you were that age. Before that, you probably weren't quite good enough when you were a bit young, unless you were world class.
Well, in the old days, Liverpool used to buy them and keep them in the reserves. That's
year.
going back a long time now, but that was was not uncommon in those days.
But the point was, you weren't really expected to be playing for a top title challenging team till you were 23, 24. So while I continue with this argument that most players get where they're going to get to by the time they're 21, and it's only the world-class ones who really improve between 21 and 24, really improve. But also, I think players only reach the beginning of their peak by the time they're about 24, because that is when the big clubs have traditionally gone in and bought them.
So you want a 24-year-old in your young player? Is that what you're saying?
I want two 24-year-olds in my young player, because I'm going for the two wingers who were England under-17s wingers in 2017 when England won the World Cup, and are now both 24 and have changed clubs, and I just wonder now if the clubs that let them go look back and think, And that is Nottingham Forest Callum Hudson-Odoi, who left my club Chelsea, and Jadon Sancho, who's now at my club Chelsea, who left Manchester City, Borussia Dortmund and Manchester United. I think they're both looking the players that I saw play in 2 consecutive Youth Cup finals, 4 games. Chelsea and Manchester City played each other in 3 consecutive Youth Cup finals, and these two played in 2 of them and stood out at that level. Now, they were never going to get into the teams, the first teams at that age, for the games they needed. And Jadon decided to up boots altogether and go to Borussia Dortmund and became a great player there. Callum Bayern Munich offered 40 million euros for Callum when he was 18, and Chelsea forced it off and finished up selling him for 3 million to Nottingham Forest. That's top business, folks. And Callum Hudson-Odoi has got, I would say, he's in the top 5 in the Premier League for quality weight of passing. It's not recognised nearly as much, the quality of his weight of passing. And yeah, he's a winger. He's getting back that pace that he had before he snapped his Achilles, I think. But most of all, it's the way he distributes the ball that is so good. Jadon Sancho, who according to Opta had the most touches in the opposition penalty area of anyone in the Premier League this last weekend when Chelsea won 4-3 at Tottenham. And he's beginning to look as though he's enjoying himself again. 24, 10 years ago, that is the age that the big clubs would have signed them. Now, it's the age that the big clubs wished they'd re-signed them. Old player.
Yeah, I'm going very sentimentally to a guy called John Doherty, who died a few days ago, but has been remembered with great affection at 2 London football clubs. Brentford, where he played, I think he had 3 different spells as a player and a short time as a manager, and at Millwall, where he took Millwall in for the only time in their history into the top division, the old First Division in the late 1980s, with Teddy Sheringham and Tony Cascarino, a formidable pair of strikers.
Strike force.
Yeah. What touched me about the reception, he was supposed to go to Millwall on the day when they played Coventry, but he passed away a few days earlier. So there were 25 players expecting to go and walk around the ground with him as a tribute, because everyone knew he was pretty seriously ill. But he didn't make it, but the players all did. And it was very notable for Millwall, but also it caught the eye of a national newspaper, and the Times had a spread of a photograph of all these players. Some of them obviously probably well into their 60s now, all joyfully together. And I know a little bit about it on the inside because Alan Dowson, the manager I've worked with in non-league football all the time, he was one of those players who went. He started his career at Millwall, and John Docherty took over, the Doc as everybody calls him, took over from George Graham when he went to Arsenal. So he was a small man, he was a winger as a player, but he was a man's man. He allowed the players to enjoy themselves. They all enjoyed working under him because he gave them a little bit of latitude. But when he had to be strict, he was very strict, and he was not a one-off, because I think that the Scottish football in particular produced a lot of players who eventually managed in England, played well in England, with this sort of sharp football brain, you know. He was a really sharp guy, and I got to know him through Alan Dowson quite a little bit more than I would have done otherwise. And he'd be sadly missed, but the tributes, to have that at Millwall, and at the very same time at 3 o'clock at Brentford, they were playing the tribute in the Premier League game against Newcastle, so they had a minute's applause from there. So in a way, he's gone out in style, you know, and deserved tributes.
Wonderful, wonderful. My ex-player, I'm going for my Chelsea manager, Enzo Maresca. My experience working inside a football club is that it really annoys players when the manager takes the spotlight. They don't like it. They don't want to wake up with the manager being in a fashion shoot or on this or the other. And I've seen a little bit too much of that down the years. Last Wednesday, I went to Southampton, and for the first time in England at a game, the away supporters at Chelsea chanted Maresca's name. He applauded them from the dugout. He heard it, he applauded them. At the end of the game, a 5-1 victory, he came over with the players, and the supporters sang his name again. He applauded them again, he waved, he turned round, and he walked away to the dressing room, and he left the players with the supporters. This happened again at Tottenham, and this time he got a little bit more forthright, and he got the supporters going with some gestures, but then he finished, clapped, walked away, and he left it to the players. And that is what's won me over to him more than anything else, because I have seen managers. We had a game where, I won't name the game, a player scored 2 goals for the first time. And when the game finished, he was diagonally on the far side of the pitch. And by the time he'd shaken it was the first game in which he'd had his name sung by the supporters. And by the time he'd walked across the pitch diagonally to the supporters, the manager was in front of the crowd, conducting them in singing his name. And there was no way he was going to give that up. And I remember I think I was there with my son. I remember turning around to him and I said, "Players won't have this." And it wasn't long before it was the next season, but they downed tools. They weren't having it. You have to want your players. It's all very well being Alex Ferguson and saying the manager's got to be the most important, the biggest person in the club, but you've got to want your players to be the biggest person, and that's what Alex Ferguson did want. I don't think he ever felt, he never wanted to be the spotlight, he just wanted to be the boss. But there's too many managers who want to be the spotlight. Maresca's proved he's not one of them. Respect. Player. I'll tell you afterwards who the other ones were.
Yeah, I think you've told me before, actually.
Because it annoyed me so much.
I'm going with Jared Bowen, who stepped up again for West Ham in a time of need in that critical game against Wolves. I don't think perhaps it was so critical for West Ham as a club, but for the manager, Jadon Sancho, clearly a lot of noise, as the expression is, around his position at the club. And had they lost the game, there would have been, I think, a huge outpouring of fans wanting him his departure.
I think there's not enough kind of respect for Lopetegui's past in this country. That it's kind of forgotten that he was Spain's manager and then Real Madrid's manager.
Yeah, and actually at Wolves he did pretty well. I think he got them to 13th place when they were struggling. He didn't take over till he did 23 games, I think. And then, of course, decided that it was time that the club weren't going to sustain his ambitions or be able to sustain his ambitions financially, not him personally, but for the squad. So it was against Wolves, so that was important. It would have been a particularly painful defeat had it happened against that opposition in the circumstances. And it was a game that Wolves had equalised, but Bowen did something that nobody else really did on the night. He just got the ball, and it was almost like Bukayo Saka's got a sort of a go-to, a signature goal, isn't it? And this was Jared's signature goal. But what I really like about it, and I think he scored a lot of goals before he came into the Premier League. Everybody thought he wouldn't score in the Premier League. He's now, I think, got 46 or 47 Premier League goals for West Ham, and almost 100 career goals in the league. But he's the most understated, from being underrated, he has kept and now he's rated. He's remained really understated. He's the most normal guy who does his work, goes home. He has got a celebrity side to his life with his partner and her family as well. So, but he's not drawn to that. It's just part of, if you like, the lady he fell in love with. And he...
Lady?
Yes, lady, yes. Lady. He has retained his normality as a person, and as he's certainly not normal as a player. He's super normal, if you like, or he's a superstar. And to do it, he's done it so often. He scores, he makes goals, but when they're in trouble, he's a real go-to guy, and he takes that responsibility. It's very late in the game, really, and it was a very special goal, whatever the context.
Yeah. I think he's brilliant because, or partly because, when you look at him, you think, well, he's not extra fast, he's not extra strong, he's quite short.
Yeah, he's good in the air for being shorter.
But the point being that maybe he's better at all those individual things than you think he is, or than I think he is, because when it's all put together, he's a hell of a player.
He's a totally forward-thinking player, and he wants to get forward with the ball. He's a dribbler as well as a passer. And you can see, as a commentator, you're aware of players, because it's your job to be aware of players who are threatening the goal, the opposite goal, when they get around the area. There's some players you go, well, that'd be a surprise if he even shoots, But Jared, he knows his game inside out now. He's matured. Hereford to Hull, now the Hammers, and now England. And I was so pleased for him because he's a very likeable guy. That he got an England goal as well, and that was a clever goal as well. Yeah. So it's been a slowish route to the top compared to some of his contemporaries, but he's at the top.
I've got two players for my player of the week, or talk about this week, and they are from the bottom two teams in the league, but they're two of the best individuals I've seen this season. Matheus Cunha from Wolves. I saw him in the second game of the season when Chelsea won 6-2 at Wolves. He got a hat-trick at Stamford Bridge last season. He's underachieving career-wise, given his qualities. He never quite made it at Atletico Madrid. I don't know why. But I think it's probably quite easy not to make it for Diego Simeone if you're not.
He didn't look then quite a typical Simeone player, really.
If you're not 100%.
But he's become, under Gary O'Neill, give Gary O'Neill credit, he's become a far more complete player.
Yeah.
With the ball, he's
I do wonder. I do wonder if you have to build your team around him, and Wolves being what they are, probably build their team around him more than an Atletico Madrid would. But I think a big club, a bigger club will come in for him at the end of the season, especially when Wolves go down, because he has such talent. I mean, he's a top talent,
all his goals are works of art, aren't they?
yeah, and he's a modern player. He's not he's a forward. He's a wide forward, really, who can play inside. He's not a centre forward. And I think, but I do think he's really gifted, and I think he'll get a club. But the other guy who I've watched from youth team at Tottenham when they played against my club, and who I've never been overwhelmed by, Kyle Walker-Peters at Southampton now, played the best I've ever seen him play last week when I saw him. He's an interesting one, Kyle Walker-Peters. The poor bloke coming through at Tottenham. The first time I picked up a team sheet and saw him on it, I'd never heard of him. And I thought, is he related to Ian Walker? Is he related to Martin Peters? You can't have somebody at Tottenham with a name like that.
They had Kyle Walker and Kyle Walker-Peters in the same dressing room.
Yeah. So, but he was a 16-year-old probably when I first saw him, and he's I think he's about 27 now, and I was told that some big clubs were looking at him in the summer and didn't take him. In the game that I saw, Southampton played as they have most of the season with a back five. It's probably meant to be a back three, but they never get out of their half. So it's a back five. But he was not at fullback because they had so many players out through suspension and goodness knows what. And he of the central three and the five, he was on the left of the central three. So he was a central defender rather than a fullback. But he was the one who went into midfield with the ball. And he not only went into midfield, he ran the length of the field, and he attacked, and he made Southampton's goal, and he was outstanding the whole game. And I think Kyle Walker-Peters, when Southampton go down at the end of the season, will get a good Premier League club.
I think I've told this before on the podcast, but it's probably worth retelling. My one story about Kyle Walker-Peters is watching the Tottenham behind the scenes documentary when Jose Mourinho was manager. There was a scene in which he went up to Kyle Walker-Peters and said, "Well, what is it, Kyle Walker or Kyle Peters?" And he went, "It's Kyle Walker-Peters." For a youngster to a man of imposing manager like Jose Mourinho, he stood his ground every inch of. He's not, as you say, he's not a tall guy. And I did see him at Southampton after that and mentioned the story, and he went, "Yeah, it is what it is, you know." And I thought there's a streak of determination there that's made him a player.
Yeah. Interested to see where he finishes up. Right, coming up later, in fact, not much later, we got comparisons with the difference this week, because we're looking at clubs, not at players. But first we have Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry.
Thanks as always, Neil. Here we go. Goals from corners have always been an identification test for commentators, particularly in-swinging corners. Replays will invariably solve any puzzle, but the wish on the Gantry is to be instinctively right. A pack of players go searching for a telling touch, and when the ball flashes into the net, those in my profession search for the right name. A scorer's celebration is a major clue, but even then it might be one who is trying to defend the set piece who actually diverts the ball past his own goalkeeper. Take the riotous celebrations by Fulham recently against Brighton at Craven Cottage. A red herring, if ever there was one. Calvin Bassey, conspicuous in the collective delight, but not his goal. It actually belonged to a former Fulham player, the unfortunate Brighton midfield man, Matt O'Reilly. So that particular joy was misleading. But it was explainable simply because the ball had actually ended up in the opposition net from a Fulham corner, something their previous 120 plus such attempts had failed to achieve. Now, I read somewhere recently in this data-driven world that goals from set pieces are down this season. Well, that's certainly not the case from where I've been watching. Arsenal defeated Manchester United by driving down this particular route. One United fan said to me that conceding a corner that night felt like giving away a penalty. 2-0, but it could have been 5 all via the same modus operandi. And 4 days later, another training ground routine earned the Gunners a point at Fulham. William Saliba netted in both those games. As for United, they conceded similarly in the next match at the start of their home defeat by Nottingham Forest, the 7th time in all this season. There is rightly much talk about the movement of the attacking players, emphasised by Arsenal, whose set-piece coach Nico Jova deserves a goal bonus. But the key is the delivery. In Declan Rice and Bukayo Saka, the Gunners have two of the very best suppliers. Near post or far post, their placement is usually perfection. Now, undoubtedly, there has been a surge in the set-piece goals. I mentioned in the last letter commentating on Thomas Souček opening West Ham's corner account at Newcastle. It was actually their 12th game of the season, so it was a bit overdue. But then a converted corner brought a consolation goal for the Hammers at Leicester from Nicholas Füllkrug and paved the way for victory in their crucial home clash with Wolves. Souček again. That's the 14th time, incidentally, that Wolves have been done by a set-piece this season. Now, I think there are several reasons why these restart numbers are remarkable. First and foremost, there is the attention to detail that goes on in training. Not much extra physical output concerned, really. You can walk through the moves. It's repetitive. Some players find it boring, but they know it is rewarding. There's also a lot of tolerance from Premier League referees on blocking, grabbing, and grappling. It's hard to see who is the initiator, defender or attacker. So most times it's called equal. It's very different in Europe in that respect. A couple of other theories, maybe a bit left field. For a generation now, defenders have been picked for their skills with the ball. The old head it, kick it centre-backs who would deal much better with this kind of problem are few and far between. Goalkeepers, similarly, have risen to the top because they can play out from the back. Barging through a crowd to catch or punch a corner looks something of a dying art. And one other thought, a very personal thought. At this time of year, most football is played under floodlights, even the 3 p.m. kickoffs. Have a look at how the lights impact the goal mouse at your club. When the ball is hung up, are they in the sight lines in these vital situations? Squinting is not a good look when you're readying for heading. And by the way, there are banks of lights all around the Emirates.
Ooh. These days they're probably data-driven, specifically directed, and moved at half-time. So.
Well, now I was thinking of asking my statistician friends to look up the ratio of goals scored from set pieces in natural daylight and the goals scored, obviously, in the evening games right from the start of the season. There was some daylight in August, I guess. But now we're pretty much playing all the games. We're in the winter ball, aren't we, as well? Yeah. Maybe that's a factor, I don't know. But it just seems to me that there are more reasons than they're being very well drilled that this is happening so regularly. I mean, every game I've been at in commentary in the last month, there's been a goal scored from a set piece. So
on the grappling and the blocking,
yes.
Don't you just think that it's fouls and that once again British or English governance of football is just getting it wrong? It's just a load of
I think
nonsense.
just the opposite, Neil, because I played non-league football at a reasonable level and I was grabbed, and I was a forward, I was grabbed and pushed and battered by defenders, and they got away with it all.
Well, that doesn't mean it's correct. It just means you had crap referees.
No, we had referees who went on to referee in the Football League.
Well, that's what I said.
Ray Lewis, who had a wonderful refereeing career and was also the official, unfortunately, at the Hillsborough disaster, actually about 3 months ago phoned me up and said, I've got a programme where I'm refereeing and you played. And he brought it. We met up at Leatherhead Football Club, and he brought it to show me. So, they were.
I think the grappling and the blocking are fouls, and
yeah, but they start with defenders.
So
let's have a whole raft of penalties.
No, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that.
So instead of Arsenal getting corners, which are a penalty according to the Manchester United fans, because they're so worried about them going in.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Let's have a proper penalty then.
I mean, I think that any defender at a set play who watches the player and not the ball is in danger of committing what is, by the rules, a foul, and by my moral justice set of personal requirements, a foul.
But we all know what happens in the penalty area is not the same as what happens out on the rest of the pitch.
God.
And that goes
Football.
for all other situations
What happens
as well.
in the penalty area stays in the penalty area. A load of crap. So there should be 4 or 5 penalties a game, and that would sort it out quickly.
Well, you've got Cole Palmer, so you're all right, aren't you?
Yeah.
So
Get in there. Right, letter from the Gantry. Also, of course, you can read it on substack.com when I finally get around to putting it up. I put one up today, and I'm going to try and put one up, quite a few up this week. So read.
we need to catch up, don't we, on that?
Right. And from letter from the Gantry to comparisons. Now, normally we use this to compare a player from, probably nowadays to compare to a player from yesteryear, but this week we're going to do it with clubs who got promoted either at the same time or around the same time and have very different outcomes in the Premier League. So we're going to start with 2 clubs promoted in 2021, Norwich City and Brentford. Martin, why has little Brentford, quite little compared to Norwich in terms of crowd capacity and everything else, why has it done so much better?
Well, the ownership, the model, the way that they've constructed the club has been near perfect, and the way that the team has been managed to give an individual style that's successful has been really a marvellous credit to Thomas Frank. I spent a lot of time in Norwich. I went to university there, and really I went in the 60s, and they were a second division club. And their great claim to fame was that as a club outside the top 2 divisions, as a third division club, they got to the semi-finals of the FA Cup in 1959.
Yeah.
And actually some of those players were still around when I went in 64 to University of East Anglia. And so they became, and they were very helpful. I played for the university. They gave us treatment if we were injured. We went to the ground and we had access to the club physios. They were wonderful to us. We played against the reserves, and so there was a lot of interconnection. So I've got a lot of affection for Norwich from the way they played that part in my very fragile playing career. And then in the 70s, then they got into the top division, maybe 72 the first time. And so 70s and 80s, they were more consistently top division teams. But really, I'm not sure that they've shaken off what they're...
In the 90s, they got into Europe one year, didn't
Yeah. They were an original founder member of the Premier League, and they beat Bayern Munich away. I did the commentary, yeah.
That was probably their biggest ever result.
Yeah, when they sort of, I think, have reverted to type. Their ownership was quintessentially English, British, which is rare and obviously not when we're looking at the clubs that are doing well. Most of them are foreign ownership. They haven't perhaps invested that much, but they've kept their identity. You drive into Norwich, and I think it says on the sign, Norwich, a fine city. It is a fine city. It was a lovely place to live, and a lot of players live in that area who moved to play there in their playing career, and then when their playing career took them somewhere else, but they end up going back to Norwich because they love it so much, and I understand it's a fine place to live. So I think maybe that's where they are. I thought the last 3 times they got promoted, they lasted 1 season, I think.
Yeah, I think 1 year they lasted 2, but
they've sort of yo-yoed, and I don't know how much will there is to put themselves out on that financial limb, really.
But it feels a big club when you get there. The stadium when it's full. It feels like a
when they're
big
playing
club.
Ipswich.
Yeah,
Of course, now
well,
they're obviously looking up at Ipswich now, which they won't like.
No. How much of Brentford's success is this famous structure with the
Algorithms,
and
yeah.
everything else, and how much of it actually is Thomas Frank having and he's just got into the players and.
But they've produced, well, the algorithm includes having players in your first team and then selling them on. You know, what they've done with Ollie Watkins, a prime example, obviously, Ezri Konsa as well, and there's a whole list
David
of them.
Raya.
Yeah. And they managed to do that and still retain the fundamental DNA of Brentford as they are now. But it was certainly in the 1940s, the last time they were in the top division.
46.
Yeah. So it remains remarkable. Again, the smallness of the ground. I suppose it gives it an intimacy and intensity, say, that the Dell used to do at Southampton. Although it's not particularly intimidating, I don't think, the atmosphere. But the Brentford fans, it's quite a middle class crowd, I think, there, and it's a lot of Londoners' second club, I think. So that's boosted what was perhaps the traditional sport that had faded away a bit with all those years outside the top flight. But all power to them. I mean, they are a great watch, and their home record is simply amazing. And of course, Thomas Frank gets asked the question all the time. All the players do. Why can't you do it away from home? Well, the truth is, their frailties get exposed away from home. But their strengths are there. So it's what, their fourth season now. So and they embody the underdog spirit which we all like in this country.
Middlesbrough, who were promoted in 2016, and Brighton, who lost the playoffs that season and then got promoted in 2017 and have been in the Premier League ever since. Middlesbrough went straight back.
Well, Brighton are the Brentford of the South Coast. I mean, the algorithm's the same. The two friends who we understand are not friends anymore at the top of each club, and almost rivaling each other, a bit like Ronaldo and Messi pushing each other to great careers and great strength. And Middlesbrough was a bit of a mystery. I mean, they went straight back down again after that season. But they, in the 90s, you know, they were in Wembley finals and
Ravanelli.
And they were sort of
Emerson, the three Brazilians.
They pushed the frontiers of foreigners back further than some other clubs. It's obviously not the most fashionable place, but I think that if you're a good football club, it doesn't matter where you play as long as you've got a community, and they've got a great fan base. They've got a very good manager. I think Michael Carrick might get promoted before the club do. You know, I think there'll be people looking at him, and we do need more English managers in the top division.
I went there last season for the Carabao Cup semi-final when Chelsea played them.
And they beat you, didn't they?
They beat us 1-0 at Middlesbrough, yeah. And Cole Palmer played centre forward and missed a handful of sitters more.
Nobody missed the second leg, though, did they? Nobody missed in the second leg.
It was 6-1, yeah. But I came away and saying, this is a Premier League setup. They ought to be in the Premier League. And of course, the owner is somebody who invested a lot of money in the club to begin with.
Steve Gibson.
Yeah.
And he's been
doesn't
honestly,
seem to be investing the same amount now.
I wonder where they would be without Steve Gibson. You know, we wouldn't even be putting them in this particular envelope, and they deserve. I mean, there aren't many people.
I mean, they went to a European final as well.
Yeah.
The UEFA Cup final,
2006 maybe.
Yeah,
around
I
that
think
time.
it was 2006.
Yeah, managed by Steve McLaren, Gareth Southgate. You know, people who've done great things in the game, and it's a little bit of a mystery. There is something that Gary Neville raised this with me a few years ago, that there are more clubs in the south at the top level than there have ever been.
Oh, I keep saying that.
So what's happened? The gritty north. We've always thought football, the heartbeat of football's been in the north.
Yeah, when Burnley and Blackpool and Stoke and they were all up in the
Sunderland and you know, Sunderland striving to get back.
Middlesbrough as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
And we've had Bradford City in the Premier League, you know. There's
Barnsley.
Yeah, Barnsley, yeah. So it does seem to have...
Hull.
I suppose the glib answer, and this is not being regionalistic if there is such a word, is that it's easier to attract players to towns, say on the south coast, where now you're bringing people into the country who don't know the country and don't realise the great values of northern cities and the wonderful welcomes that they will get. But they look at the they look at the temperature
Absolute
charts.
Nonsense. They'd all be better off going to Woking than to Manchester City. Let me just ask you this. Brighton has a capacity of 30,000. I know that they have no intention of changing their attitude buy young, sell. Buy young again, sell.
Brentford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you think they could have the capacity to change if they wanted to? And to actually go for something a little bit more.
They'd need foreign investment, and that then takes it to investment rather than ownership. The Brighton owners own Brighton.
And do you also think that maybe 30,000 for Brighton, which I think is a town rather than a city still, is probably about the maximum of what they can achieve as a...
I don't know.
Regular
I think they could probably go up a bit of a level. I would think 40,000 would certainly be sustainable as long as they're successful. But then you go down, I mean, they were in one game away from going out of the Football League not that long ago. So you'd be careful what you wish for, I think is...
Okay, our final one, both promoted in 2015, Bournemouth and Watford.
Well, we're in the south again, aren't we? I think Bournemouth is one of the great stories that probably hasn't been told fully. When they got up, I mean, in my time, they've moved the ground round from there to there. Sorry if you're listening. They've moved the ground 90 degrees. Yeah. My first commentary in my first year was my first year at Sun Television. I think it was my fourth or fifth game was on the same site, but not where the pitch was pointing. So they've had their difficulties. There was a stand that wasn't never completed for ages. It looked as though they'd go under rather than up, and then suddenly they started going up and having again. I think you find a group of players and a manager that's right for your club at that particular time, and that overachieves. But once they got to the Premier League, I remember thinking, Bournemouth in the Premier League, you know. Then if you
which
can
of course
sustain
was their first time in the top level.
Yeah. So people like Eddie Howe have been right at the heart of all this, and good ownership from. For the local people who did the job, and then what seems to be very good investment, understanding of the culture of football in this country, which is not always the case, I don't think, from all the investors. So of course they went down for a couple of seasons, and then they found their way back again. So proving it wasn't a fluke.
And when they came back, they were quite ruthless. They sacked Scott Parker, who brought them back very early on, brought in Gary O'Neill, who did a great job in surviving that first season back up, and then sacked him, and went for Iriola, who's been unbelievable in the quality that he's got out of them.
The breath of fresh air is an understatement. He's
they're a
amazing.
good watch, aren't they?
Yeah, they're a great watch. I've got my next game is there. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a very good commentary position, which helps. And as you know, Neil, the fish and chips.
I think it's closed on a Monday.
It is closed on a Monday.
Yeah.
I found that out the hard way.
Yeah, it's closed on a Monday. No fish and chips on.
Maybe I'll stay overnight.
Okay.
And Watford, we haven't talked about Watford really. Watford, obviously, they've got a one-off type of ownership, which does mean that they are very ruthless with their managers.
And this is a modern one. This is the Italian ownership that also owns Indonesia and one other club.
It's this global wish to have fingers in many pies, or football clubs in many countries. And it does make it very difficult for those who come in to run the club as they wish. I'm a big fan of Tom Cleverley's. I've got to know him pretty well through his playing days and his connection with Woking Football Club. And he's not to say swimming against the tide. He's fighting the culture of the club by doing so well. I mean,
the first thing they did when they came in, which I think was 2012, somewhere like that, the Italians, was they sacked the manager, it was Sean Dyche, who was doing in his first job as a manager, was doing very well. Yeah. But they replaced him with Gianfranco Zola, who got them into the playoffs. They lost the playoff in the final to possibly. I was going to say Queen's Park Rangers, but I don't think it might be Fulham.
Crystal Palace.
Oh, Crystal Palace. Yeah. Was that the Neil Ship?
No. There've been a few playoffs.
In the top corner. Yeah. It was a top corner goal. No, I can't remember who it was. But it wasn't Shipley, it was long after that. But Watford, do we say that Watford, with their two spells with Graham Taylor in the top flight, that was their history in the top flight, and that's it? Or should they be doing as well as Bournemouth are doing?
Well, we shouldn't forget the part Elton John's played in this, Sir Elton, because he gave, if you like, Graham Taylor Graham was perfect in his time for the club, but he needed somebody who had the club at their best interests at heart. A little bit like Ed Sheeran's trying to do for Ipswich now, I think. But it worked so perfectly. They were odd companions, really, in a different way. A really pragmatic, down-to-earth guy from Lincolnshire, and this sort of showbiz megastorm that Elton John became. So I think that period transformed Watford, and they're still reaping the benefit of having. And Elton still, I guess he still goes from time to time. I've certainly seen him there relatively recently. So, that's sometimes it can take one person to just blow the cobwebs away, you know. And he certainly did that and gave them the belief. And what a fantastic example for community spirit within the Watford area. They've done it all with the fans on board, so more part of them really. But Tom will try to get them up there again and play Bournemouth in the Premier League next season.
No chance. It's goodbye to the yellow brick road. Right. Voice of Passion. Followed by Voice of Reason. Now, I've got to tell you that we have discussed this already. And Martin is completely opposed to me. I discussed it with him on the phone this morning and he was completely opposed to me. And I've discussed it with him here and he's completely opposed to me. But our three producers who are sitting out there are with me. So Martin, I'm warning you now. It's me for you one.
Yeah, opposed is the wrong word. You are totally unrealistic. but listen, because you got to.
Well, they don't have to. They can switch off.
Well, I've got to listen.
But you'll agree with me. And that is, this is how capitalism works, okay? This is how it works. You have competition, and that brings the prices down because the producer is trying to get you to buy their products, and it's best for the consumer, the customer. That's how competition works, but not in football broadcasting. In football broadcasting, you have the producer, the broadcasters, the owners, the football clubs, and the consumers, the supporters. And what happens is that a plethora of broadcasters come in, and that improves the lot, not for the consumers, but for the football clubs, because the price goes up and the price goes up and the price goes up and they get more money, and that makes it worse for the consumers, the customers. So this is the old structure of capitalism, which was just very simple because there was just a set of producers and a set of customers, to the new life with technology in which there's a producer, a landlord and a tenant, if you like, and the tenant is getting shafted. And there are more and more games going on, more and more outlets, and you've got to subscribe to more and more different producers in order to watch your team. And it's costing more and more money, and it's not doing the consumer any good at all. And I can't believe I'm saying this, I would far rather we just had Sky or whatever it was, plus of course highlights on terrestrial, and that way the consumer would get a better deal.
That's the most right-wing statement I've ever heard from you.
Says the man who's so far outside of
the fact is that works if you don't like the product, you walk away from it and go somewhere else.
But football's a joy, it's an addiction, we can't do that.
Well, you can, and nobody does, and that's why the prices are high in the grounds. Let's start with that, because people don't vote with their feet. Of course they're angry, of course it's much more than it's ever been. The suppliers will say that the product and the housing of the games is much better than it's ever been, so you're getting much more value for the extra money that you're being asked to pay. But the truth is, the rights are owned by football, so the rights holders decide what is going to be. I mean, for years and years, decades, you and I know better than anybody probably listening, that there was no live football. For most of our lives, there was no live, well, certainly half our lives, there was no live football. And then when it came in the 80s, it was very tentative. It went from October to April, only involved 6 or 8 clubs. And it was a half-hearted attempt to get it off the ground, although it was a successful attempt, because gradually when the Premier League formed, by then there was realisation that instead of turning off people from going to football matches, it actually enhanced the product and made people want to go to football matches. So the process is this. You're getting live football on television of an incredible number of matches that never happened before. Is that a good thing?
Yes, but
Right.
not
okay,
if it's
no, that's all you had to say.
Not if it's on a load of
No,
different
you had to say, is it a good
streams
thing?
that we have to pay for.
Is it a good thing? Yes. Yeah. Right, we're both, I think everybody agrees with that. But it cannot, the football industry has chosen not to give it away, understandably. They've chosen to get the best deal that they possibly can from the broadcasters, and that has gone up ridiculously. When I was working for ITV and BBC in the 70s and working for ITV against BBC, if you like, in that non-live football era, head of BBC Sport, head of ITV Sport met up over a lunch, wrote a couple of figures on the back of an envelope and said, well, that's what we'll pay that. That's all we're going to pay. And had they said no, there would have been no football on television. So now it's gone the other way. So now the game is so popular and so well televised that they say, right, we're going to have a bidding war for it. Now, the Monopolies Commission does not allow a monopoly. So Sky are not in a position where they can have all the football. It's just not legal in this country. And therefore, another partner has to come in, and maybe because there is a sense that the other partner might not want all that much, that another partner comes in. But as far as the live Premier League is concerned, you've only got 2 providers. So you've got 2, for the Premier League, you're going to pay 2 subscriptions, not 1. It doesn't seem to me that is over excessive in the circumstances.
It's been more. I mean, this season it's Amazon Prime as well.
But the Amazon Prime is not a football subscription channel. Amazon Prime is something that you buy for all sorts of things.
But it's
using
still,
Amazon's.
it's still extra if you want to watch all your team's games.
It's only if you're not an Amazon Prime subscriber,
Yeah.
it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to watch your team's games, then you can go on Now TV and pick your games at a per match rate, which means you don't have to pay the full subscription, but you won't get anything. The price of it is determined by the market value of the product, and as far as the Premier League is concerned, particularly around the world, I'm beginning to wonder what's going to happen in this country. Whether the fact that, and you're complaining about this country, if you lived in any other country in the world, you could watch all the games on one channel. It just happens to be here that it's...
yeah, and you're saying the market price, but when you talk about the market price, you're really talking about economically market price, the price that the television station is paying to the football world, not the price that the consumer has to pay to the television station.
No, but you're paying it. I mean, if nobody paid it, then it wouldn't work and the price would come down. But no, it's not happening because people love football. And listen, I'm as much an addict as you and anybody listening, probably more so than many. And I would pay anything to watch it. I've been lucky enough to have my life in the industry, so that hasn't been the case. But if I was sitting saying, now I'm not working for Sky anymore, if I had to pay for Sky, I would pay for it because it would be more important than some of the other things in my life. But if I couldn't afford it, I wouldn't pay for it. And if lots of people say, we can't afford it, and that might happen. And everyone's right to say in their own personal circumstances whether they want it or not. But because, for whatever reason, but we believe the addiction to football, that people will pay the prices. It's just the way it is, and it's not going to change. And you can't have just one in this country. I guess you could add to that there may be other channels that I follow the National League because I'm a Woking fan. So there's another subscription there. DAZN have just done a new deal with a comprehensive deal. So there's another. But that's different competitions. You're really speaking about the Premier League, and you've only got the 2 subscriptions to pay, and the price is determined by the fact that the television broadcasters, who I will defend to the hilt, because they've got to get this money back somehow. And that's the only way that they can do it. And will it change? Probably, but only in this country. Around the world, yeah. If you just went across the channel, probably even, certainly in the English-speaking countries, you get it all on one deal. And you might be paying as much as you're paying here for 2 deals. Anyway, I put that argument to bed. Neil's lovely because he's champion of all sorts of things and his passion. But the realism is, and I agree with a lot of his passion, but there's no way that this can change under the current system of it. And that includes the law of the land that you live in.
And he calls me right wing.
Who's the government at the moment?
No wing. Okay, we're bringing back a segment we've only done once before. This is the last one apart from stoppage time. We've only done once before, and of course it's to do with people like him. And it's live! But people like him, not just as a commentator, but as a coach. You went to West Ham Wolves this week and did that game. And a few days before going, you weren't sure if either manager would be in the job. They were both in the job. So that was great for you because you could analyse what has happened in the last few weeks, guess the team, not guess it, it was more than a guess, inform yourself on what the teams were likely to be and do your preparation. You've also coached, so you must have coached against clubs who have changed their manager and it's the first game. How do you prepare for a game when you don't know who when there's a new coach, as a commentator or as a coach playing?
Well, from a television point of view, the television companies love it because nothing better than selling the first game of Ruben Amorim or the first game of Jose Mourinho back in England again or whatever. They love it. And we used to joke at Sky, how on earth has this happened again? We've got somebody else's first game when we didn't have every game, you know? It's almost like conspiracy theory. Oh, they knew they picked that game because they got a bit of inside information. So I think there's a freshness about it. I mean, there were certain managers where you really do know what the team's going to be because that's the way they make very few team changes. Some now we get rotation. For example, I've got 2 Chelsea games in January. I will have no idea which of your 26 players will be actually starting the game. Yeah, well, I'll be tapping into you, as I have done for many years, by the way. I think it's more of a challenge. Certainly as an opposing coach, you do worry a bit about how they're going to come. You know, you might try and get your ear to the ground. You might find if one of our players knows one of their players, you know, to see whether you can get some feedback on it. But I do think it's more challenging. It's certainly not something that keeps you awake at night. And as a commentator, you really, you know, oh, well, how's this gonna pan out? Because for me, the joy of commentary is that's one team, that's the other team. You've got the notes, you know, fair amount of what's going to happen. Then they come together, and what's the outcome going to be? You know, I think every game is such an adventure, and the way football's played in this country, it's an adventure right to the final whistle. And now with so many substitutions, you do have games within games now, and that is a challenge to just make sure you know who's still on the pitch.
I mean, as a coach, if you don't know how they're likely to play, I mean, it must be a real hard task to prepare.
No, if you're doing well, it's not a problem at all. You go, well, we know how we're going to play. Let's concentrate on what we're going to do. We know we're good at this, we're good at that. They might be this. And then after 10 minutes, you might call the captain over and say, look, they will have worked, good players will have worked it out. Hang on a minute, they've got a back 3, you know. But then it becomes just a game between 11 players and 11 players. And I do think that the tactical analysis has, in some way, got an over sense of proportion as to what the actual experience of watching football is, you know?
It's because it's not a game on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I love the tactics of it, and I wouldn't be involved in the different ways that I am if I didn't. But I do think sometimes you just got to go, let's just play the game. You know, and at the highest level, and I've never coached beyond the National League, so at the highest level, I understand why it's not as simple as that. But in the National League, it can be, because look, we think you're good. You know, we've worked hard this week. You know, we know 1 or 2 of their players are still there from before, and maybe they will change it, but let's be us. And that's exciting. And of course, sometimes you fall flat on your face doing that. I've done that a few times.
Right, that is it for this week, apart from stoppage time. Stoppage time. And we are coming up to Christmas, so I've thrown in this week. What is your favourite Christmas song?
Yeah, I've got a really direct answer to that. Driving Home for Christmas, Chris Rea, is that's by absolute mile, by however long the drive is, it wins hands down. Great voice, great tune, and great sentiments.
Well, when I thought of this, I didn't think of the one that struck me in the last week, because I've watched 2 away wins, and of course Jingle Bells, Jingle Bells, Jingle All the Way. Oh, what fun it is to see Chelsea win away is one of my favourites. But I am going, aside from that, to the more public one. It's got the John Lennon, Yoko Ono, Happy Christmas, War is Over, If You Want It. And in the world we're living in now, a few more people need to stand up and sing that this Christmas.
Hear, hear.
Right.
But the Driving Home for Christmas is still my favourite.
We've got coming up another guest, and our first guest in the kitchen, who is
the wonderful Carlton Cole, who's been with us in the kitchen, and we've recorded an episode which we're going to let you have over the Christmas period, and I would thoroughly recommend it. It was a wonderfully entertaining hour and a bit, and he's very open, very honest. And a special guy we've known since he was a youth team player. You know?
I've known him since he was 15, when he wasn't a little boy. He was a very tall, lanky boy. But it's quite hard hitting as well. A lot of it, very intriguing. So that to look forward to, and it gives us a chance to talk about West Ham because we'd never talk about them otherwise. Okay, from Martin and me.
See you next time.
Ta-ra.